Namaste. Peace in, love out. How are you feeling today? We're streaming live across the internet. So, for all of you night owls, welcome to our Dharma study for tonight. It's a little after 10 o'clock here in Los Angeles. And I just want to say thanks for coming to take a moment to check in on yourself, to reaffirm your mindful values. And wherever you are, prepare yourself for the week ahead. Because what we know is that the holidays have arrived. And with it comes their own sets of pressures. Many people are trying to wrap up a lot of last minute details, right, at work, at the office, before they get caught up in the slew, the onslaught of all the things that come with the holidays and with the holidays in pandemics. And so there's going to be a lot of emotional juggling going on. There's going to be a lot of trying to find a sense of balance and stability in the midst of all that's taking place. And so I just want to invite you to take a moment to slow down, to bring your attention within, to reaffirm your nobility, right? The nobility of your heart, your awakened heart, and also to check in on the Dharma. We're going to be talking about verse 49 today in our Dharma study. And verse 49, it's really a teaching on generosity and the importance of being generous, right? Because it's a kind of a timeless holiday theme. We all know the Christmas story, the Christmas Carol, and we all know what it's like when we're so attached or clinging on to something, right? When we don't want to let it go, where we hold something so tightly that it inhibits our own growth, right? Where that thing becomes so paramount in our lives that we miss out on everything else. And so the Dharma, mindfulness, it reminds us that we have to keep everything in right balance, right? Everything has to be in this right order. And so I just want to encourage you, wherever you are in the world today, to one, meditate daily, two, practice mindfulness, right? Practice awareness and presence of being attuned to your interior life, but also being aware of what's going on around you, and that there is a reciprocal relationship between what goes on within and what goes on around. And so that's kind of the setup for our practice today. And so let's begin with our study. And if you have any comments, I can see them on the screen. So please feel free to share your thoughts on the text or with what I'm saying. And, we'll just kind of dialogue that way. And if you just prefer to sit back and just chill, that's perfectly okay as well. All right. So let's start with verse 49. I'll read the text and then I'll read the story that goes behind it. Now, the stories that go behind it, you have to, I don't know if I would take them literally, but they help to provide context to why this teaching was said, right? What led up to this teaching? What helps to provide some context and some understanding to it? And so we're going to start with this. It says, in 49, as a bee gathers honey from the flower without injuring its color or fragrance, even so the sage goes on alms rounds in the village, right? As a bee gathers honey from a flower without injuring its nectar or fragrance, even so, the sage goes on alms rounds in the village. And so, if you don't know what alms rounds is, it's when the monks lived in the monastery, they would get all their support from the community, right? So they would seek donations, gifts of food to help support the sangha, to help support the monastery. And so these monks, they would go on these daily alms rounds. They would have a bowl, they would have their robes, and they would just go around to each person within the village and get support, right? And that's how they sustained themselves. That was part of their practice, their spiritual development. And when we think about it in today's context, it's a lot like nonprofits. You see a lot of nonprofits, especially this time of year. They're seeking donations, they're seeking their year-end support to help sustain them. And similarly, if you think about companies that are going on startup rounds, right? They're going out and seeking investors. They're going out and finding angel investors. They're going on funding rounds. They're seeking VCs. They're seeking all sorts of individuals that could help provide sustenance for their idea. Now, it's at a different scale, but it's still this same idea that you can ask without injury, right? That if you go, like the monks went on their alms rounds and the bee gathered honey from the flowers, gathered its nectar from the flowers, that it was not an act of harm, right? That asking is not an act of harm, right? That seeking support for your vision, for your idea, there's nothing wrong with that. And for some of you today, that's going to be a really liberating idea, because maybe you are stuck in this mindset that, you know what, I really can't ask for help. I really can't ask for support in this thing that I'm doing, in something that I'm trying, in a business that I want to start, in a school that I'm trying to apply to get into, to study for, right? Scholarships, you may not feel worthy about it. And a lot of people feel this sense that they don't have value, that it's not intended for you. And just as this teaching says, the bee goes from flower to flower, right? Collecting the nectar. The monk goes on the alms round from villager to villager seeking support. So too must you at some point in your life seek support. Seek support for the vision, seek support for the mission, seek support for the goal that you are trying to obtain. And this idea of seeking support is a reminder of this circulation that we are in, this flow that we are in, right? You aren't meant to just grab hold of something and never let it go, right? You are meant to be a steward of it. You're not meant to just be careless or reckless with it, right? If you only had this much water, right, and this had to last you for some time, the idea isn't that you would leave it closed and never take a sip of it, because then you would die of thirst, right? But if you took a little sip, right, and you were managing it and you were stewarding it, and if you had some other people with you and they took a little sip and they were caring for it, right, then that is an appropriate use, right? It is the circulation, right, that you're sharing, and that everyone can sustain it, right, that everyone can help each other. But it's when you hoard on to this, right, and you never open it, you never get quenched, right? Your thirst never gets filled. You're not able to support yourself. And so I really want to encourage you today that if you find yourself hoarding onto something, the the text, it uses this term miser, right? This like this idea of a closed fist and hoarding, or just kind of this, it's the idea of this greed, right? That you're just this engaged in a blind consumption. And the Dharma says that that is not a skillful path through life, right? That could lead to some sort of harm. And you are to find a way where you can be in a better sense of harmony and balance with your environment, right? Where that thing doesn't have such a strong hold on you. And so in verse 49, um, it talks about the story of uh, Kosia, Kosia, right? And they called him a miserly, wealthy man. Um, and he was residing in the Jetavana monastery. Now, something was going down at that Jetavana monastery, because every time I read one of these stories, it's always happening at the Jetavana monastery. It's almost like the Jetavana monastery is like some sort of soap opera, right? It was like 90210. It was like Meryl's place of the day. Everything that went down was going down at Jetavana monastery. And so here it was. Okay, so while residing at the Jetavana monastery, the monks um, they kind of had this intuition that there was uh, Kosilla was going to have an awakening, right? He was going to have a sense of enlightenment coming up, and so they saw, right? They pictured Kosilla, and he was a wealthy man, and so the story goes, Kosilla was in the upper room of his house, right? And that upper room meant instantly that this was a person of privilege, of status, because they had multiple stories to their house. But it's interesting how they point out this multiple stories in here. It says Kosilla was very reluctant to give away even the tiniest part of anything belonging to him. So one day, to avoid others, this is where it gets good. It says one day to avoid others and sharing, he and his wife, they were making some pancakes in the uppermost story of their house, right where no one would see them, right? And it's this idea that even though we have so much, we try to ensconce ourselves, we try to seclude ourselves, we try to take ourselves out of, right, out of circulation, out of this life, right? And when you try to take yourself out of, you just find yourself creating your own prison, right? They're in the upper room trying to avoid everything. Here they are. They have the most, right? They have all the abundance, they have all the prosperity, they have all the success, but they're trapped in this upper room, right? Trying to avoid everyone. Do you ever know what that's like to be in a space of having so much, but you're just so scared of losing it that you just find yourself imprisoned and trapped, right? You can't go out, scared of everything, living in a total state of fear, but you have so much. And why is it that when you have so much, you also have so much fear that go along with it, right? Just always being negative, just always being caught in cycles of just thinking that everything is going to go wrong, right? And so here it is. It talks about um, Kosilla and his wife in the uppermost story of their house where no one would see them, where they were hidden away, where no one would, right, get a whiff of the pancakes that they were baking in secret. Can you imagine that? Even though you have so much abundance, you're still like secretly making pancakes so that no one would see, so that no one would smell, so that no one can get a taste, right? And so early one morning, right, one of the monks arrived at their house, right, and uh, this was and this is where the story goes, right? It goes, and so the rich man, Kosilla, and his wife, they the uh, saw the monk, and they were like, "What do you want? What are you doing here?" Right? Because the monk came to make his alms round. Right? He went from place to place in the village, and he made his alms rounds. And so they, Kosilla had this giant basket filled with dough to make all these pancakes. Right? It was only two of them, but they had this whole basket of dough filled with um, so much. Right? It could feed so many. It could feed so many, but they were in the upper room, hiding away. And when the monk asked for some of the dough for his alms rounds, they said okay, right? They agreed to it, right? Kind of begrudgingly, but they agreed to it. And when Kosilla saw that his wife was preparing to make a regular pancake, he said, "Oh, no, 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 that's too much, right? That's too much. You need a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of this dough for the pancake, right?" So even what they were preparing to give, it was like, "Oh no, that's too much," right? And so they says that he picked off a tiny piece of the dough and placed it so that the pancake would be made in the pan. And here's how the story goes. Now, this is where the story gets a little fantastical, but it's here to point us towards something, right? It's here to help shape an idea. And it says that as soon as the dough was placed into the pan, the pancake swelled, right? It began to fill the entire pan. Can you imagine that? That even though this person, right, Kosilla, the very wealthy man, wanted to get just this tiny bit of dough so he can just like get rid of the monk and like feel like he did his duty. He took the little bit, right, a little seed, a little nugget, and he placed it in the pan. And what happened? It began to expand, right? The little bit of dough, the tiny bit of dough began to expand. It began to enlarge and until it filled the pan, right? Can you imagine that? And as you could imagine, they were all a little astounded, right? That this was taking place, that this was happening. And so finally, they took the pancake out and they kept the pancake. They were like, oh, that's still too much, right? This pancake, we can't give this pancake away, right? This is too much. Even though they were filled, even though they had more than enough, even though they had a tremendous amount of abundance. And so they got an even smaller piece and they placed it in the pan. And guess what? The dough began to rise and fill and expand and filled the entire pan as well, right? It happened again. And then they did it again, right? And the same result happened. And what this is trying to illustrate is this idea that generosity is like a seed, right? That it is like a small nugget that can expand into something that can fill the pan, that can create overflow, that if everyone contributes just a portion, right? Even if it is just a tiny portion, that creates abundance, that creates prosperity, right? And so that creates this circulation. And so if you find yourself in this place where you're just hoarding onto something and you're not being willing to share and you're not being willing to be generous, that you just begin to accumulate, but you also create your own prison, right? You create yourself, you seclude yourself in the uppermost part, making pancakes in secret, even though you have so much. And so if you don't want to be creating pancakes in secret, if you want a sense of freedom of heart, if you want a sense of liberation, then this is where you have to begin to practice this generosity, right? Because if you were generous, you won't be hiding away in the uppermost part of your house making pancakes in secret. You would have an awareness that you're providing a little bit of nugget, you're placing a little bit into the pan, and that the pancake will expand. That you're not diminishing yourself when you are generous, right? That when you share, you are not doing yourself ill will. Now, this isn't to say that you give away everything, right? But it's that you can give just a small portion, right? A small portion of your overflow, and that will expand, right? That will enlarge. Just as it says here that a bee that gathers honey from flowers without injuring the color or fragrance, right? The bee, it visits the flower, it drinks its nectar, but the very act of drinking the nectar of the flower, it begins to pollinate the flower, right? So the flower's very survival, right? Its life flow, it's dependent on that exchange, that reciprocity of the bee taking a little bit of its nectar, but it gets its pollination, right? It gets its renewal, it gets its new form, right? All because of that act, all because of that exchange. And so you have to begin to think about the goals that you have for your life, the dreams that you have for your life, and then you have to begin to comport that with the generosity, the sharing, right? The exchanges that you make within your life. Where's the reciprocity? You want to start the business? Where are you giving? Right? Where are you being generous? Where are you helping someone else advance? Where are you moving forward? And if you find yourself in a place where you have everything, right? You have everything you could ever imagine that you could ever want, but you are secluded in the uppermost room of your house making pancakes in secret, just filled with fear, that may be time to say, oh, I need to let go of something. I need to find some release, right? I need to be generous, right? I need to begin to engage in exchange so I don't live in this prison of fear, right? I won't live in this place where I'm making pancakes in secret because I don't want anybody to know, right? And so the teaching kind of concludes, the story kind of concludes. So, so Kosia kept seeing all these pancakes. He kept eating all of these pancakes, and finally he got full. And he was like, "Oh, I'm tired of all these pancakes. They keep growing here. Enough, enough, enough." And so the monk says, "Hey, why don't you bring the basket with you, and let's go to the monastery? Right? We're going to go back to Jetavana." And so these monks, they must have been some hungry monks, because yesterday we talked about a story where it was some sweet treats that the monks wanted, and now they're talking about bringing some pancakes back to them. And so these monks, they must have ate very well. That's all I can say about that. But uh, so here's the thing that happened, right? Here's the thing, and it happened in an interesting way. They went back to the monastery, and that one little basket, right? They kept baking the pancakes. They kept putting a little bit in. It began to expand, and they were able to feed all the monks at the monastery. And it says here that right there, 500 monks, right? So they fed 500 monks with that basket. And it says at the end of the meal, they delivered the discourse on charity, and both Kosia and his wife became enlightened, right? They became awakened. Their heart became aware, right, of this of this ability to be generous, and through generosity to find freedom, where you don't have to be secluded in the uppermost room of your house, fearful of the world, fearful of everything that could possibly happen, shut away, that you could bring yourself back into existence, right, back into your society, back into your community, by opening up of your overflow. And so it says, as the bee gathers honey from the flowers without injuring its color or fragrance, right? The bee doesn't destroy the flower when it collects, right? The bee doesn't take everything. It doesn't take all the petals. It doesn't take all the thorns. It doesn't rip it up by the root. It takes of the overflow, right? The nectar of the flower. And the fragrance is still there. The color is still there. The beauty of the flower is still there. The roots are still there. The nutrients are still there. And it says, even so the sage goes on the alms rounds in the village. And so for those of you, you can see yourself as any part of this story, as any part of this teaching. You can see yourself as the bee, right? Actually engaging in that period of exchange, right? Actually going around trying to collect, going around trying to pollinate, going around trying to start the business, going around trying to go back to school, going around and trying to build something, to gain a new skill, to build the team, to create the startup. You may see yourself as the flower, right? You may be the investor. You may be the person with abundance. You may be the person who has the nectar, who has the resources, and you are just kind of hoarding onto it, right? You can find a way to stop hoarding and stop living in this place of fear, caught up in the upper room of your house, making pancakes in secret, right? Or you can see yourself in through the eyes of the sage, right? Who was going on alms rounds, right? Place to place to place, asking from villager to villager. And, or you can see yourself as the villager, right? Deciding whether to give. And so it's just a reminder that there's a reciprocity in all that we do, right? That whether we have the abundance or we don't, we give of our overflow, we give of our nectar. When we are receiving, we do not take what is not offered, right? And we do not try to overburden, right? We take of the nectar. And when we receive something, we also give something back, right? There's an exchange, right? There's an exchange that takes place there, right? There's something that needs to take place. When you receive, you also have to give back. And that's how this karmic order, this reciprocal nature, is established. And so that is our Dharma study for today. Let's meditate. If you don't mind, let me get the music queued up, and then we'll start our meditation. All right, so we're going to meditate now. Um, Listen, remember the story as we begin to enter into our practice. Remember the verse: be generous, give of your overflow, of your nectar. But when you are also receiving, do not injure the flower, right? Do not injure. Do not try to overtake. Don't rip up the roots. Don't try to take the color and the fragrance and take everything. No, you're just there to exchange the nectar for the pollen, right? There has to be a reciprocal order there. So, coming into an upright and comfortable seated position, I'll invite you to allow your left hand to support your right hand, thumbs curling up until the tips touch. You can place your hands gently into your lap, taking a deep breath in and out as you settle into this meditation practice. Hold this space. Maintain this container. Meet whatever arises. And tend to it all with equal measures of wisdom and compassion. For those who are living in fear, secluded in the uppermost room, living in secret, unwilling to be generous, unwilling to share, this meditation is about release, generosity. For those of you making your own alms rounds, seeking the investors, writing the resumes, seeking the promotions, this meditation is for you. May you see wisdom and understanding and clarity in your alms rounds, in finding support. Call yourself to stillness. Bring yourself to peace. And with this breath, I affirm the vision you hold. And I affirm the person who holds the vision. And I affirm the values that guide the person who holds the vision. And I affirm the spark that ignites the values that guides the person who holds the vision. May you see abundance and prosperity. May you be led and held. May wisdom and compassion continue to guide you, breath by breath, moment by moment. Namaste. Well practiced, Sangha. What a privilege it was to be able to sit here and meditate with you and to hold this space with you, to bear witness. Um, this was really good. Don't remember this. This is a good lesson, right? This is a good holiday lesson. This is a good holiday verse. This is a good teaching on generosity right here in this holiday season. So wherever you are today, remember that we take our seats in meditation so that eventually we get back up. But we get back up, we take with us the lessons that we've learned. We take with us all that we've gained and carry it forward. Carry it forward in our hearts, carry it forward in our thoughts, carry it forward in our actions. Continue to carry it forward so that others awaken because of the light that you hold. All right? Let's say our affirmation of nobility before we go. I have value and I have worth because I am of noble birth. And with this breath, I will awaken to all that's possible within my life. I will lead and I will achieve. I will lead and I will achieve. Nicely done, Sangha. If you said that simple affirmation, you are well on your way towards your ennoblement, to awakening your heart to greater levels of wisdom and compassion. Peace in, love out. Put one finger up for love. Put two fingers up for peace. Put three fingers up for this mindful community. That means you, that means me, that means we, all of us. Now bring it all in to awaken your heart. And may your mind be free. Double heart taps if you got joy. Double heart taps if you got peace. Double heart taps if you meditate. Double heart taps for you. Double heart taps for me. Take care of yourselves. I'll see you back here next time. Namaste.